Can y'all still hear me okay? I made some adjustments.
Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me today is my new co-host, Youri Smouter, who is stepping in now that Rachel is not going to be able not Rachel. All my friends are rubbing together in my head today. Sorry, now that Renee is no longer able to commit to us on an every other Saturday officially, Youri is stepping in. I thank you very much, Youri. I appreciate it.
Wow, those are big shoes. Those are very big shoes. Those are very big shoes to
Well,
fill.
hopefully,
Congratulations to BLP. Yeah, BLP. Yeah, Black Liberation. BLM.
Black Liberation Media, yes. Used to be
Congratulations to them
BPM,
for
used to be
having the
Black
day
Power
off.
Media, but now it's Black Liberation Media.
But that being said, it's an honor to fill. It's an honor to fill her shoes. Big shoes to fill.
And our guest, who is joining us for the first time, is Nat, the host of the Comics Collective Action podcast.
You got it right the first time. It's Collective Action Comics.
Collective Action Comics podcast. Sorry, thank you.
You're good, man.
And who has done really good work on the Ultimates, which is why I wanted to have him on to talk about Captain America today, because there's lots of weird stuff with Captain America in the Ultimates that I was really scared was going to be in the Marvel movies. I was like biting my nails until the first Captain America movie. Like, they're not going to do some Ultimate shit, are they? And in the end, they did a really good Captain America movie. That first Captain America movie was understanding the way the cinematic universe works and the way it's different than the comic book universe. That first Captain America movie was as good as you could have wanted it to be, better on some levels. And Captain America is still the good disabled guy who remembers what it's like to be disabled when he becomes a superhero, which is really important and central to Captain America. Because you have to remember that the 1941 in which Captain America was created was an era before polio vaccines. And Steve Rogers had polio as a kid and was really unhealthy as an adult as a result.
Interesting. And also, this is I'll just say I wasn't a big fan of like Captain America. I wasn't a big fan of the Captain America movies, but that's for probably completely different reasons. Like, it's just I'm just like sick to death of like World War II being like marketed as the good war. Ergo,
it's important. It's important to understand the surprisingly good politics of Marvel in the 1960s. To understand that in the 1960s,
some of their politics were good.
Some of them, there's bad stuff too. The bad stuff in the 60s is Iron Man.
Oh, and Tales of Mystery.
Well, but Journey into Mystery.
Or Tales of Suspense. It's whichever one Ant-Man
Iron Man
book.
Iron Man and Ant-Man.
Actually, it's very interesting that you say that, because so basically, like my personal, my politics has basically become this. Like, I'm not against people learning about World War II. I think folks should learn about World War II. I just don't like how World War II is taught, because it's taught as the good war.
Yeah.
We completely dismiss the Spanish Civil War. We don't give enough attention to the atrocities Japan committed to China, Korea, and much of Asia.
We don't deal with the complicated nature of the fact that the U.S. was really, really, really fond of Hitler up until the moment that he was at war with our allies.
We paid for his war effort.
Like, the British elites were very, very, very pro-fascist. And so
the French elites loved Hitler. There was a pro-Hitler party in the French government even before
which is why you cannot teach. I mean, obviously, you have to teach people World War I to understand why World War II broke out. But the fact that so many schools And look, I had a very good history teacher. My teacher was basically like a soft Michael Parenti meets like
Hell yeah.
Chomsky. So we got to learn a little bit because I insisted about the Spanish Civil War, and he kept trying to explain. He kept trying to hammer to us that World War II was not about freedom and stuff like that. Ergo, you cannot teach kids World War II without teaching them the Spanish Civil War and the fact that the West supported Franco's rise to power.
It's also really important to understand when teaching World War I that we fall into this very foreshadowing World War II Germany as the bad guy pattern. When, despite the fact that, yes, the Kaiser was instrumental in actually declaring war to start hostilities, that the Kaiser was also the person doing the most work to try to head off hostilities until the very last minute, that he declared war because he believed the treaty gave him no other choice.
Yeah.
And that ultimately the assassination of the Crown Prince, who was pro-peace, it's really important to understand the sick and twisted nature of the fact that the reason the Crown Prince was in Sarajevo to get shot in the first place is he was making a diplomatic mission to Serbia to keep Serbia and Austria friendly and to try to keep a general war from breaking out. And he was shot by the
guy who killed him was a complete idiot.
The guy who killed him was a member of a radical Serb group called the Black Hand, who were the political ancestors of ironically, the Croat group,
and also a Green Lantern bad guy,
Hitler in World War II. And they had the same sort of nationalist make nice with the Germans.
And apparently, like the Croatian fascists, of course, like all fascists are grotesque. The Japanese, of course, take it to a whole nother level. But apparently, like the Croatian fascists were
the Croatian fascists were really, really bad. I mean, it was the Croatian fascist party, the Austrian fascist party that voted for the Anschluss with Hitler, the Yugoslavian fascists, several others, the Hungarians, the Romanians. They openly called themselves Nazis.
Cool.
They were the Nazi party. The reason that the Austrians voted Anschluss through their legislature peacefully when Hitler threatened to invade was because the Austrian Nazis defected against their own chancellor to vote for union with Germany and say that Hitler was the real leader of the Austrian Nazi party. And it was humiliating, and the Austrian Nazi chancellor ended up in the same concentration camp that Stepan Bandera got put in later, where Hitler put all the friendly leaders that he thought he might need later, but he didn't want actually trying to run their countries.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
the French Nazi guy who had been in...
Hitler was really all about, like, Greater Germany, like, on steroids. And, like... And so, like, Stepan Bandera, like, he was a fascist. Like, he was a true blue fascist. It's just that, like, he wanted his own independent, like...
He wanted his own independent Ukraine.
Not like a colony of...
And Hitler was happy to let Bandera's people run Ukraine, but Hitler was not willing to let them be in charge. And he was not willing to let them disrail his plan to make Ukraine the Kansas of Germany, which you really have to understand. He was always going to invade Russia.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
because one of the whole war aims of World War I, once it actually started, was to attach Ukraine to Germany. The original Ukrainian Democratic People's Republic that came about after the Civil War was because there was a German army that was occupying Ukraine as part of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which had given Ukraine to the German Empire when the USSR made peace with Germany. They felt bad about it and they didn't want to do it, but they figured, what else can we do? They won the war. We have to accept the defeat in order to really have a revolutionary system and break from the past.
Interesting.
And then they ended up the black and green armies ended up running the Germans out. And then the Ukrainians tried to form their own nationalist army to defend their own government. And by Ukrainians, I mean the pro-Germans who had not wanted the Germans to leave. And that's where Ukrainian nationalism comes from. The right-wing Ukrainians who didn't want the German Empire to leave Ukraine during the Russian Civil War.
I see.
Yeah, Ukraine has such a well, I mean, I don't think it's unique.
Reactionary is the word. You have to
Ukrainian nationalism and Ukraine's history has a lot of thorny.
You have to understand Ukrainian nationalism starts in the 1920s. Yeah. And it starts in the 1920s as a reaction against the Soviet Union. Yeah. The majority of Ukrainians at the time of the Russian Civil War were great Russian chauvinists and not Ukrainian nationalists. Ukraine was the true Russia. And even other Russians sort of looked up to the Ukrainians. These are the guys that Ivan the Terrible was from. And it's our relations to these guys that made our guys the czars, and they're important too. And we respect them within our empire. They're Russians.
Actually, fun fact. This is a fun fact. So over the summer, I got to see some friends of mine in Scotland. We did a big trip to several parts of North England. My friend Julia, she's from Romania. Her boyfriend is from Bulgaria, and we were with somebody else from another Orthodox church. I can't say. Anyways, from another Orthodox church. So then I said to him, okay, what's the difference between Russian Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Greek and Bulgarian? And then Chris was looking at me very sheepishly saying oh dude, there is no difference. It's all part of the same thing. It's just the language, and then
it's national.
Characteristics. This one may have Greek characteristics, but it's more or less there's nothing really.
It comes down to who thinks they're really the heir to Constantinople, though, and that's why you've got different churches.
But then to which I said, okay, well, if there's not much difference then between a Russian Orthodox church and a Ukrainian Orthodox church, what the hell is with all of
the Ukrainian Orthodox Church exists because they left the Russian Orthodox Church in protest when Stalin let the patriarch come back and made nice.
Okay.
Because Stalin did his big rapprochement with the Russian Orthodox Church. They let the patriarch come back. They repealed the union rights for sex workers. They repealed the abortion, the pro-abortion laws. They repealed the anti-sodomy laws. They basically repealed all the socially progressive stuff that the old Bolsheviks had done under Stalin. And they made nice with the Russian Orthodox Church. And ironically, the Ukrainian church did not see this as, oh, Stalin's coming back to us. He saw this as, those filthy Russians are betraying our church to make nice with the communists. And so they formed their own really right-wing Orthodox split church instead. And they're in commune, and yes, they're in commune with Rome. They entered commune with Rome during the period before World War II, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was very much aligned with Bandera and his people during World War II. And more importantly, they were very much in line with the CIA operations in Ukraine that didn't end until the 1950s.
And then then there were CIA operations in Ukraine after the 1950s too, Project Aerodynamic.
True.
Well,
but I want to go back to the Spanish Civil War.
Wait, before we go back to the Spanish Civil War, it's actually important to also say it's also important to note this. Well, what would you say to the modest Ukrainian nationalist that wants to be part of the European Union, that wants to be part of NATO, that wants to completely have no relations with Russia, no matter what kind of a government Russia has, when they say, look, we've been fighting Russian colonialism from Tsarist Russia to Soviet Russia.
They weren't fighting Russian colonialism in Tsarist Russia. They were the Tsars. The whole Romanov claim to power was that their relation descent by marriage from Ivan the Terrible. The Romanovs were ruling the Russian Empire because they claimed to be Ukrainian. You have to understand how this works. The idea that there were Ukrainian nationalists fighting the Tsars is anti-communist Nazi propaganda. There were Cossacks fighting the Tsars. Ivan something, I can't remember. Ivan Mazepa. Ivan Mazepa was the leader of the Volga Cossacks in what's now Ukraine during what was then called the Great Northern War between Sweden and Russia. And he aligned with Sweden against the Russians. But he was not a Ukrainian nationalist. He was a Cossack hetman. There was no such thing as Ukraine. This area was divided between Cossack territory, which the best way to think of Cossack territory is to think of it like an indigenous reservation in the days when indigenous people still had the ability to move and hunt on their reservations, sort of a Wild West movie sort of indigenous situation. While at the same time, you had Poles who were all over that part of East Galicia, which had gone back and forth between being Russian and Austrian. In fact, the East Galicia was majority Polish. The city of what's now Lviv in Western Ukraine was the city of Lwów in Eastern Poland. And the rest of it was the Pale of Settlement. The Pale of Settlement was where the Russian czars let the Jews have their own country within a country, essentially. It was the one place in Russia there was no discrimination. The Jews could live there. The Jews had their own towns everywhere. Their rabbis ran the community. Their elders ran the community. It was Jewish liberation as far as it went, but it was also subject to pogroms from the Cossacks and the Poles and the Russian neighbors on the other side. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't great. That's the reason for Zionism. People wanted to get out of the Pale and have a real country. And it's important to understand how the Pale of Settlement figures into Zionism, but that's another show. However, here the Pale of Settlement matters for our good Captain America politics because it's where Jack Kirby's family was originally from.
And that is a transition.
Exactly. I'll get back to Ukrainian nationalism in a bit. But anyways, long story short,
but Ukrainian nationalism, and this is just Ukrainian nationalism is a creation of the reaction against the USSR. It was born during the Russian Civil War.
And then fostered by the United States.
And I'll just say they've done a very good job at they've done a very good job at their propaganda, because even Ukrainians who want nothing to do with with like Nazism and stuff like that, but
see, that's the problem. That's the problem.
Russia is because of that very propaganda. Is because of the propaganda of Ukrainian nationalism.
That's the problem. It's really hard to find a Ukrainian who actually wants zero to do with Nazism. And a lot of the ones who do want zero to do with Nazism are members of communist parties that are banned in Ukraine now.
Yeah, they're in jail. They're all in jail now.
The leaders of the Youth International are still missing.
They also don't have a very well-funded lobby machine
Yes.
because stories like the Holodomor, which you know, the famine, which a lot of Ukrainians blame squarely on Stalin's anti-Ukrainian racism, blah 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 blah, and so forth like that.
So
Once you start digging into the source of that, which is
Yeah,
a bit of a half joke, it all comes from well-funded civil societies from Canada, the U.S., and so forth.
Even before that,
and their founders were runaway Nazi war criminals and continued to lionize Stepan Bandera.
What became the official story of the Holodomor, as told by Robert Conquest, which is the famous version everybody knows, which he later recanted from, and then because he's a right-wing asshole, he recanted his recantation.
What an opportunist!
Yeah, well, you know, but anyway, the history that he accepted was the the Congress of Captive Nations bullshit.
Exactly.
Which was written by people who had written the original version together with Alfred Rosenberg. Which is, again, the history, the Pale of Settlement, where Jack Kirby's family came from, was not a hotbed of Ukrainian nationalism. It was a hotbed of Zionism because people wanted to get to Palestine and away from the pogroms. So, I mean, if we're talking about Ukrainian nationalism under the Tsar, then we're talking about the Cossacks' right to be free and pogrom the Jews, which is not a very nationalist sentiment. It's just, you know, we don't want you messing with us or stopping us from plundering our neighbors.
So now, and also, but going back to Captain America, but the
Spanish Civil War is important for Captain America because it's important in the context of 1941.
Well, yeah. So like I said, I get turned off whenever I see I don't watch World War II movies anymore. And anytime there's a setting in World War II, I go.
There is one World War II. There is one World War II movie everybody should watch because it is the cynical, anti-patriotic anthem of Cold War pessimism, and that is Clint Eastwood and Telly Savalas in the immortal Kelly's Heroes.
I love Kelly's Heroes.
Everybody should see. Because it's about criminals robbing a bank and winning a battle by accident.
And even though Clint Eastwood actually has very reactionary politics, Letters of Iwo Jima and what was the other one he did? Yeah, I think Letters of Iwo Jima.
Letters from Iwo Jima.
Oh wait, what was the other one? There was the one about the folks who raised the flag of Iwo Jima. Wait. Okay, so there's one movie where it's set in both Japan and the U.S. during the war, and you get to see a good taste of Japanese fascism.
I haven't seen
Flags of Our Father. Flags of Our Father.
Yes, Flags of Our Father.
Okay, so Letters of Iwo. Yes, so I think Letters of Iwo Jima is the one where Ira Hayes. That's the story of Ira Hayes. That's a really good film, and then Flags of Our Father.
Well, so Clint Eastwood's best movie,
Changeling, is also a really good movie.
Clint Eastwood's best movie is a horribly reactionary piece of Confederate apology that yet manages to have this really great anarchist message, and it's called The Outlaw Josie Wales. And it's just terribly depressing. But it has this great moment at the end where Clint Eastwood and the bad guy are sitting there, and Clint Eastwood knows who the bad guy is, and the bad guy knows who Clint Eastwood is, and Clint Eastwood says, "Well, what are you going to do?" And the bad guy says, "Well, I guess I'll go south and keep looking for him, and if I find him, I'll tell him the war's over."
But now, in defense of my anti-World War II industry. a lot of the comic books, which Hollywood has, endlessly, milked. The reason why a lot of it is set in World War II and World War II is always portrayed as a good war is because a lot of the writers came from that generation.
Well, Jack Kirby was, as I just said, a Jew whose family came from an American Jew whose family came from the Pale of Settlement. Much of his later work would wrestle deeply with Zionism. Stan Lee would write off this deep wrestling with Zionism as a commentary on the civil rights movement, which was like a really shallow watering down of the real deep soul searching of Jack Kirby's X-Men, where you have to understand in Jack Kirby's version of the X-Men, Magneto has no redeeming characteristics whatsoever. He is manipulating his own children into being supervillains without telling them he's their dad.
The X-Men comic books, I find, well, in general, the reason why I've never gotten...
You have to remember who Magneto is in Jack Kirby's imagination. Are you familiar with the Stern Gang?
Yes.
Jack Kirby, when he created Professor X and Magneto,
terrorist organization, in case people don't know this.
Yes, what they was thinking very specifically of Albert Einstein, who was an assimilationist, a universalist, a socialist, and an anti-Zionist. Professor X, who's willing to work for the U.S. government against the bad mutants because he says mutants are human too. That's very important for Jack Kirby because he's saying, in a sense, that an anti-Zionist Jew should be willing to betray his own people and country. And you've got his bad guy is Magneto, who's based on Abraham Stern.
But that's so interesting because, and in fact, I was rewatching.
In fact, what's forgotten all too often. And I hate that we're talking about the X-Men instead of Captain America, but we'll get there. Magneto and Professor X meet in Israel. And Magneto loves Israel and Professor X hates it. And that's a big part of the dynamic between them. And this is lost in a lot of the modern retellings. But you notice Professor X does not stay in Israel. And that's important to him as a character. He was in Israel. Clearly, he's Jewish if he was in Israel living in a kibbutz, right? So why isn't he still in Israel? What didn't make him happy in Israel?
Right.
That's quite fascinating because when you watch the movies, which I personally think they should redo the movies as like a television series, like a real life action like television series.
So they did that. It's the Fox X-Men TV series.
Legion, right?
No, but that's animated. That's animated.
Yes, it's animated, but it's still amazing. And they recently brought it back with a sequel.
I couldn't get through it with all the stupid costumes and the fact that everybody.
The stupid costumes are so true to the comic books. It is not X-Men without the stupid costumes.
That is true.
You don't see Wolverine. It was so great finally seeing Hugh Jackman in the yellow and black costume. I have to admit that, just as a fan of the comic books. Finally seeing Hugh Jackman in the yellow and black Wolverine costume was like, I've lived long enough.
Radical, you will clearly see this is where I'm like too much strictly of like a movie.
No, I get you. No, but so anyway, so Captain America, 1941 is important because the Spanish Civil War had happened by 1941.
Yeah.
In the Spanish Civil War, the Nazis backed Franco. And while the U.S. was officially not involved and was pro-Franco in a lot of their foreign policy, all of the Americans who actually fought in the Spanish Civil War were a member of a group of New Yorkers from Brooklyn called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Now, it's really important to understand that I say this last part. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade were a bunch of American communists from Brooklyn. Steve Rogers in 1941, when he becomes Captain America, is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid who's for some reason lives, probably because he's disabled and therefore poor, in a neighborhood that at the time was mostly Jewish and Italian, Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
The white kid should be over in Queens. Why is Steve Rogers from Brooklyn? Because he's poor and disabled. Now, so you got to keep that in mind. Steve Rogers is a poor, disabled kid from Brooklyn who wants to fight Nazis. He's already looking forward to the U.S. joining World War II at some point, and he wants to join the army to fight Nazis. Now, who were the people in Brooklyn who wanted to fight Nazis in 1941? They were communist veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, mostly. Now, obviously, he's a kid with polio. He couldn't have gone to the Spanish Civil War, but he would have if he could have. He wants to fight Nazis. So we're talking about a kid who was a Popular Front communist in 1941 when he became Captain America. That's the first thing you have to understand when you look at the historical context of who Steve Rogers is.
But and again,
the only people in the United States who wanted to fight Nazis that badly, who were not themselves Jewish, which Steve Rogers is obviously not. Jack Kirby was very careful to make his Captain America a blonde-haired, blue-eyed goy.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Rogers, since he's not Jewish, he must want to fight Hitler because he's a communist. It's just the logical,
I love that reading.
It's the logical, material answer.
But again, this also goes to show you the problem with the with what I call anti-communist leftism, because all of those stories which you just said are all heavily suppressed.
Of course, and that's really important. But this is the thing. 1941, Brooklyn was the national headquarters of the Communist Party of the United States, and the official Communist Party of the United States party line was the Popular Front supporting the New Deal and Democratic Party anti-fascism in the form of Lend-Lease, because ultimately that would benefit the Soviet Union too when Hitler inevitably turned on Stalin. Because you can call Stalin stupid you can criticize Stalin all you want. He knew Hitler was going to double cross him at some point. He misguessed when. And that had very bad consequences for Russia. But he knew that Hitler was going to do something at some point.
Well, very important note, and this came from my anti-communist leftist history teacher for 2 years in IB history. Stalin did lobby Churchill, France, and the
US.
US.
Collective security. We all lose track of this. This is something else heavily suppressed. Herman Wauch, despite all his failings as a Zionist, does a good job of talking about it in The Winds of War, where it's pointed out that Stalin's first foreign minister, Maxim Litvenko, was a Jewish Russian with a British Jewish wife who was very friendly with lots of British and American communists, and who spent about a decade trying to get a collective security agreement against Hitler between the USSR, France, the UK, and the US. He spent almost a decade doing this from like 1929 to 1939. And when they finally signed the pact, it was because it was in response to Munich, where they said, no, we're not going to stop you from going into Czechoslovakia, but you can't go into Poland. At which point Stalin decided, well, they're not going to stop him from going into Poland either, and made a deal to put a buffer between him and the Nazis for the inevitable invasion of Russia.
No, I mean, Stalin did the non-aggression pact because he had gone to Churchill and so forth, and they all gave him the cold shoulder.
And
gave him the cold shoulder because
he fired Litvenko.
They hated communism, they hated Judeo-Bolshevism, and for them, like, it wasn't even about lesser evilism. They actually really just liked.
Well, that was the whole thing. Is they thought Litvenko was the even though he wasn't Jewish, his wife was. Well, he was Jewish. He was Jewish, but his wife was a British Jew specifically. But because he was Jewish, they didn't like him. They thought he was the epitome of this Judeo-Bolshevist stereotype that proved all that communism was a Jewish conspiracy. That was why this Jewish guy was the ambassador to the UK, was the foreign minister for Russia. It was this.
The funny thing about anti-Semitism is that, like, yeah, so there's that, like, right-wing, like, anti-Semitism of, like, the Jews are a bunch of, like, you know, bloodthirsty Leninists before there's even, like, a Lenin that wants to, like, steal all of, like, our money. But then there's the other one of, like, like, the Jews want to secretly control the world. They're the reason why banksters are mean and stuff like that.
They're the same conspiracy. The same conspiracy. The Jewish bankers control communism is the whole fundamental point of the Judeo-Bolshevism.
That is a wild take.
That is Jewish bank communism. Communism was invented by Jewish bankers to put everything in the state so banks can make money off the state.
That is a deep misunderstanding.
Now, you know, the irony.
But in defense of the Rothschild, that's an insult to them because they were all about, like, capitalism.
Anyway. Well, so you have to understand. So the whole you have to understand that Sartre did a whole book on anti-Semitism where he explains how the anti-Semite is not worried about rational thinking in the first place. Mm-hmm. The anti-Semite doesn't believe in rational thinking. The anti-Semite believes in religion and gut feelings. And so he'll say whatever the fuck he wants off his gut because he's just winging it. And all he cares about is that he wins the argument. He doesn't care whether anything is true or not, because his initial premise is basically, I have agreed to accept this lie in order to build this national solidarity between people who should be divided by class.
Fascinating stuff. So I never thought I would actually plan to get a book of Jean-Paul Sartre because I failed philosophy, but I actually do want to get that book of his about anti-Semitism. So
it's disappointing when he ended up being a Zionist, but it's also understandable because a lot of Jewish leftists did end up being Zionists.
Sartre was a Zionist?
Sartre and Beauvoir both.
Oh no. Well, my hero.
They thought.
Funny enough, my hero John Pilger, God rest his soul, a journalist he often lionizes is Martha Gellhorn. I read a collection of her journalism, and I personally wasn't that impressed because she definitely harbored eugenics, definitely had a deep anti-Haitian stuff, and when it comes to like World War II, yeah, she became basically like a rabid, like like Zionist and like anti-indigenous, like Arab person. So
there is a lot of difficulty, and this is where you really have to hand it to the revisionists, because their myth really does capture people in a certain place. But so the founders of Israel were not in Europe for the Holocaust. This topic came up with someone once. Weren't Netanyahu's family Holocaust survivors? And I said no. And he said, well, but I thought no. See, Netanyahu's grandfather, Nathan Milikowski, was from Russia, from the Pale. He was the one of the great proteges of the founder of revisionist Zionism, Zev Jabotinsky. He went to Palestine before World War I, or just after World War I, when it was opened up by the Balfour Declaration. So he was one of the first Russian legal settlers. There were lots of Russian illegal settlers through the Zionist agencies before Britain opened up Palestine, and deals with the Ottoman Empire to let certain numbers of people in, but it wasn't opened up until the Balfour Declaration. And that
I'll give you both the contact information of Barry Weisletter, who's been on my show a couple of times. He's part of the NDP Socialist Caucus and this great left organization called Socialist Action Canada. Now, he is of a Jewish background, and I saw a recent presentation that he and a Palestinian Canadian, Gada Sasa, gave to it was a big solidarity meeting about Palestine. And he said some stuff which I thought was deeply shocking and disturbing, which goes to show you how suppressed this history is. But he said that like a lot of the founders of Israel and what became the Likud party, a lot of them were actually basically collaborators in Nazi
Abraham Stern, and this is something that Netanyahu really doesn't want to talk about because Stern's successor, Yitzhak Shamir, who took over the Stern gang after Stern died, Yitzhak Shamir became a Likud leader and prime minister of Israel. So obviously you don't want to talk about the connections too much, but Abraham Stern was in the next room in that infamous picture that Netanyahu likes to show everybody of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and Hitler. And as soon as they had the Grand Mufti out, they had Abraham Stern in, and they took all the same pictures and had all the same meetings. And Hitler sent the pictures with the Grand Mufti off to Palestinian Arabs, and he sent the pictures with Stern off to Palestinian Jews, and tried to play both sides against the British.
Well, and also, actually, Ken Loach, you probably know him, very, very well-known British socialist film director. Yes. He actually wanted to do a play about certain Zionists collaborating basically like with the
Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Shamir, Abraham Stern. Like I said, Stern was literally in the next room. They took the same pictures with Stern. They took with the Grand Mufti.
And that play was shut down. Like it never saw the light of day. Tony Greenstein, who's this British leftist, was one of the many people that were kicked out for non-existent anti-Semitism.
Well,
he is Jewish, son of a rabbi. Like he also has been writing books about that secret.
So you got to remember that Trotsky was labeled anti-Semitic by the Jewish Socialist Bund for being anti-Zionist during the Russian Civil War, and that was one of the ultimate breaks. Trotsky told the Jewish Bund, "You've got to join the Communist Party and give up Zionism." And the ones who didn't want to do it started calling Trotsky an anti-Semite. Because remember, Trotsky was Jewish.
That was old as time.
He was not religious. He was very much an assimilationist and a universalist in a more militant and radical way even than Einstein. And let's face it, Trotsky was not a pacifist. We can all agree on that. And so Trotsky,
some of his fans want to minimize how he wasn't.
So you know what? I will go ahead, and I have a list as someone who came to Marxism through anarchism and is still and whose idea of a Marxist is Negri. So I'm a little free and loose myself in the eyes of many, But with all that in mind, I have criticisms of both Trotsky and Stalin. But my criticisms of Trotsky are not what a Stalinist criticism of Trotsky would be. And while my criticisms of Stalin are actually fairly close to Trotskyist criticisms of Stalin, it's really important to understand that most Stalinists would have been in the left opposition under Stalin for the simple reason that they would have stood up for their queer comrades then too. And this is something we don't always remember right now, is that part of what the left opposition was opposed to was the rapprochement with the Russian Orthodox Church and the repealing of all the socially liberal stuff that the Bolsheviks had done.
But is that why you still had fast forward after World War II is done, and Israel is founded as a state?
Stalin, sadly, was a nationalist and a great Russian chauvinist. And great Russian chauvinists have always had problems deciding what to do with Russian Jews and what category Russian Jews fall into.
So does that explain why there still was a lot of anti-Semitism, not just in Russia, but Eastern Europe in general, and why some Jews from those backgrounds still wanted to either move to the U.S. or Canada or just move directly to Israel?
So you have to remember that the Stalinist Communist Party was very much, with the exception of its rapprochement with the Russian Orthodox Church and its exceptions for the Russian Orthodox Church. I mean, we're talking about the Stalin Communist Party. They're not exactly pro-religion. These are the people that Jean Paul II was made a hero for standing up to in Poland after the Civil War, after the World War II. Remember?
Yeah, pity the assassination on him
Well, we got the Boatmobile out of it.
By that. So if anybody wants to come at me, fine. But
well, you know, it goes to you really have to be suspicious of any Polish anti-communist whose best friend in the church hierarchy was a chaplain in a artillery unit in the Waffen SS during World War II. What kind of Pole was he again?
Opus Dei as well. Pope John Paul II was very close with Opus Dei, which is like the most socially regressive fascist.
Well, have you read the great American paranoid Cold War thriller author David Morrell, who is best known for First Blood, which is the wonderful book that became the Rambo. But who also wrote the amazing Fraternity of the Stone, which is a conspiracy, which I don't think it's too far from some degree of reality, but in the Fraternity of the Stone, Opus Dei is an intelligence organization working for the Catholic Church in the same way that the CIA works for the U.S. government, and has the same quasi-official connections and operations that the CIA does. And it calls shots for an assassination squad that goes around the world taking out heretics.
Or, to map that onto reality, communists.
Yes, it's very much. Well, yes. I mean, that's the whole. That's very much part of it. Liberation theologists.
Yeah.
and countries like.
But this brings us back. I'm going to go back again because there's 1950s are where we get into the bad politics of Captain America.
Absolutely.
But I want to get back to the good politics for one more moment, which is that.
I thought the bad politics would have been. Late 70s and 80s, the rise of Reagan.
So what's interesting about that?
The 70s stuff is actually pretty good. Some of it is pretty good.
So let's talk about the 80s. Because you brought it up, let's talk about the 80s and Reagan. The 1980s, a man named Mark Grunwald takes over the writing for Captain America and has several iconic storylines which touch on various political features of American life. The Serpent Society is about labor unions, but it's about labor unions that are corrupt and have sold out and are just trying to make money through crime. It's a labor union for costume criminals who take care of each other and have a socialist thing going on with each other. But at the end of the day, they're still robbing banks and the money comes from working people. So there's that. And that's an interesting mix of good and bad, because on the one hand, he's talking about the very real problem in the early 80s of union corruption and unions selling out. But he's also making labor unions kind of the bad guys.
Right.
So it's complicated, but he uses it to talk about the very real issue of the unions supporting Reagan at the time. Because remember, this is the Teamsters who supported Reagan for president. while Mark Grunwald is writing about unions this way. So it's not necessarily as bad politics as it looks at first.
Also, fun fact: the Air Traffic Control Union supported Reagan.
Yes, before
Reagan
he broke
promised,
them.
Reagan listened to their concerns, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll support you." So they actually supported him, and then Reagan, like no less than like a month into like his presidency, union busted them.
Yes, and it was just terrible. And this is why you don't ever support the reactionary, no matter how much he says he wants to help workers. He's lying.
Exactly.
That's also the period.
Certainly never trust a Republican. I would also say never trust Labor and the Democrats.
The 1980s is also the period during which the great American socialists, A. Philip Randolph and I'm having a moment. I hate it when I have a moment. March on Washington. Bobby Kennedy's campaign manager. Realignment. Oh, I can't remember his name. But anyway, the leaders of the Social Democrats of USA, who were the proteges of Walter Schachman, who were the proteges of Trotsky, who were ex-Trotskyists, it's important to understand. Schachman and Trotsky had a break. Schachman became a social democrat and a pro-Cold War socialist, which is a very weird thing to be.
But they do exist.
And in the 1980s, Social Democrats USA, which was run by A. Philip Randolph and by the man whose name just doesn't want to come to my head right now.
I'll try to find it.
Made nice with CIA to provide organizing help to Solidarity in Poland against the USSR in the 1980s. Helped Solidarity organize labor unions against communism. Now, you can make arguments that the Polish labor movement really was fighting for Polish workers against a Polish Communist Party that did not have deep roots in the Polish working class, but was rather grafted onto Poland by great Russian chauvinists who didn't much like Poles. And there were lots of issues. But at the same time, all the people opposed to the communists in Poland, except Solidarity, were unreconstructed Nazis, and Solidarity had bad friends.
And for more information on that, folks, go to 1+1 because I have a great interview with Boyan Stanislavski, and we actually go into the entire history of Poland during the Cold War.
Though to his credit, Lech Walesa has learned his lesson well enough that he's been protesting law and justice ever since too.
But lots of people have been protesting him, actually booing him because he's the reason why they exist.
Oh, I know.
But, Joseph Gargan, is that the name you're looking for? Is that the
no? That's not the name I'm looking for.
Okay.
And
Talk
I
about
don't
John
know
Martin.
why I can't remember it. Just a sec.
But was he a white guy or a black guy?
He's a black guy.
Mm.
Oh, I think I may know who you were talking about. Was he queer by any chance?
Yes, he was.
Yes. Okay.
I'm almost there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Bayard Rustin.
Yeah.
A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, along with Roy Ennis of the CORE, were very friendly with the Reagan government.
Reactionary.
Well, Ennis himself was always thought the same as Fanny that the Negro household should never be without the Winchester on the wall, and he was big into gun rights his entire life, and he let it take him reactionary in the 80s when Reagan was president because he decided that gun rights were more important than anything else. And he wasn't a black guy from California, so he really didn't really have the deep knowledge of how Ronald Reagan had disarmed the Black Panthers. He thought the Republicans might be serious about the gun rights thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't call Ennis. Roy Ennis. like there are certain like people like in black politics, which I wouldn't call them the black misleadership class. That's mostly like the Obamas of the world, the Oprah Winfreys of the world, and so forth. But there is what I call the black grifter class, and Roy Innis and like Louis Farrakhan and
Ennis. I've always thought of Ennis as the guy, the civil rights version, the civil rights movement version of the white guy who really was trying to be liberal and got burned by the Democrats and decides he's going reactionary and becomes a Nazi. Or usually
but you can say the same thing about
so Roy Ennis, in a way that I can understand. I have to say that as a white person, I'm deeply sympathetic to someone who finds himself in this position. As someone who was a member of the great civil rights movement of the 1960s, Roy Ennis was there in the 70s while he saw Democrats like Joe Biden run against Republicans, some of them black, who had supported the civil rights movement, and turf them out of their office and move to the right, patronizing to these white flight suburbanites. And he saw this in the Democratic Party of the 70s, and this was central to his decision to support Reagan in the 1980s. Now, you can say, you want to call him a grifter? You can call him a grifter all you want. I will not stop you. It's just, as a white person who understands sort of the betrayals of the Democratic Party of the post-civil rights 70s, I understand how a black leader can feel, okay, we're going to burn this shit down now. The only way the Democrats are ever going to do anything for us is if the Republicans win. The Republicans are good on gun rights, so I'm going to campaign in black churches on gun rights.
All I know about Louis Farrakhan is that Chuck D called him a prophet, and now Chuck D works for the State Department.
I know, it's so weird how
I'll say about
one of many examples of crazy inside-out politics.
All I will say about Louis Farrakhan is that Malcolm X repudiated Elijah Muhammad's joint events with the American Nazi Party, and Louis Farrakhan didn't, and that's worth knowing.
And FD Signifier has a great piece about the real face of black capitalism, and he goes into Bill Cosby, Louis Farrakhan, and Jay-Z. Folks should definitely watch that.
Mm-hmm.
But back to Captain America.
Bill Cosby built an entertainment empire showing white liberals how white black people could look on television.
Yeah.
But that's a funny. Okay, actually, wait. Before getting back to Captain America in the comic book world, I find that also quite funny because that kind of falls into basically made up tropes that racists actually say.
Yes, it does. It does. And you remember.
For example, I always thought it was strange that Sidney Poitier felt that he could only play good people in movies and so forth. And it's
when you talk about whether patriarchy really applies to black Americans, it's very important to look at to understand that the model of white supremacist patriarchy has a racial and gender hierarchy, yes, but it's not what people think it is. If you read the horrific but necessary book, The Sword and the Distaff, by the horrible racist William Gilmore Simms, you would understand that according to the KKK, for the vast majority of American history, the gendered racial hierarchy has gone white man, white woman, black man. Because the black woman was the confidant and friend of the white woman in a situation where the white woman was the family disciplinarian and the black people were considered children. And because disciplining children was part of the women's sphere, black women were the white women's assistants and were often responsible for disciplining black men. And we don't like to talk about that because we're really big on this idea of women's rights. And I don't like to talk about it too much on the air because then I'm a white guy bashing white women and I start to look maybe a little misogynist, and I try to avoid that. But at the same time, white supremacy has had a trauma on the black family because the black family did not fit into the capitalist system as people. They fit into the capitalist system as capital.
Well, but just like when America was stolen, founded, whatever term you want to use, against Native Americans, they had to depict Native Americans as savage cannibals that would scalp you.
Which is particularly ironic, since it was the Native Americans who taught the Massachusetts colonists how to farm in Massachusetts soil. Yeah, and so when you think of John Locke's, we were the first to till the land.
But you've always had that trope of Native Americans as savages. The people who defended, ironically, Native Americans would often, they would insult them while defending them, like saying, no, they're not all ignoble savages. Some of them are the noble savages that you can civilize.
Yeah,
and then when
the good ones.
And then when it comes to black people, in order to be very brutal towards the slaves, they had to make up stories that like all of the slaves came from like savage backgrounds.
Do you guys know who
the male buck is going to like rape your woman? The young black woman is going to be overly sexualized, so you have to like badly like discipline her, and it's only like the older woman that can be like the mammy and so forth.
Yes,
and that has and then it's the same thing with like when Trump calls Mexicans and Latinos a bunch of drug dealing rapists.
Well, and that's the trope.
Like,
there's a 1950s movie called Touch of Evil, which ironically stars right-winger Charlton Heston in brownface as a Mexican cop.
Oof.
The bad guy is an American cop played by Orson Welles, who is trying to cover up the real perpetrator of a crime because a Mexican-American migrant laborer is being framed for it. And the person who is really responsible is, has protection from the cops. And there's this really, really gripping story where the fact that the law is against him because he's not a white guy, and Charlton Heston sort of goes over the edge and breaks the law and becomes and has sort of a psychotic moment, but still ends up, he's still the good guy of the movie, and it ends up having a decent resolution. It's not quite as awful as some noir movies.
That's another guy who was like a Kennedy type of liberal, and then
Orson Welles
fell like the rabbit hole of like gun rights and became a very reactionary.
Orson Welles is a weird figure. Orson Welles was a communist before World War II and during World War II, and stopped being a communist during the McCarthy witch hunts. I don't believe he named names. He protected people like Joseph Cotton, who had worked with him, Agnes Moorehead, all of whom had also had communist leanings. But anyway, this is actually a good segue back to Captain America, because Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds is put into the revisionist origin story of DC's, then National Comics, very short-lived World War II hero, the Crimson Avenger. And in the secret origins of the Crimson Avenger after the reboot in the 80s of the DC Comics universe, the Crimson Avenger runs a newspaper, but he's a communist who got shot in the leg fighting for the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. And so he's a champagne communist who is hunting bad guys and fighting Nazis because he's anti-fascist. And this is important because, again, this is very much the sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy that Steve Rogers was. Throughout World War II, you have all the World War II stories have a remarkably good politics for their time.
in which you have like communists who have to like hide their identity and stuff
Well,
like that.
it's the bad guys are Nazi spies
Yeah.
across the board, or gangsters who are selling out the government to the Nazi spies, and are frequent because, the whole notion that, the people who make the money don't hate fascism. The Red Skull in his first comic book appearance is actually a rich American guy pretending who is working for the Nazis. Remember 1939, the business plot. No, it's 1936, 37 was the business plot. No, it was 39. I take it back. 1939 was the business plot against FDR.
Mm-hmm. Led by Prescott Bush.
Led by Prescott Bush, yes. And this is funny, Averill Harriman, who later went on to work for both FDR and Truman and then JFK.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Harriman's a very interesting figure for sure.
But yeah, no, once he couldn't get rid of FDR, he decided, I'm going to go to work for him and make sure that it doesn't get too communist.
Mm-hmm.
And he really co-opted a lot of some of FDR's more left-wing ideas and made them less left-wing. And that's its own fascinating history too. But anyway,
yeah,
the Red Skull is originally an American industrialist named George Maxson, who's pretending to be German. And the whole modern revisionist is part of the whole modern revision of who the Red Skull was, and actually making him German as part of the 60s revival of Captain America, where they made the remarkably good choice to make the bad guys Nazis instead of communists.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is important because at the same time, over in Iron Man, which did not sell as well as Captain America with its better politics, Tony Stark is fighting communists every damn month. Iron Man is all the negative stereotypes about the military-industrial complex wrapped into a hero during the 1960s. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's really bad.
The bad guys he's fighting should have been the good guys. And in fact, the Black Widow was an Iron Man bad guy in her first appearance.
In that version of her.
In that version of her.
There was a Black Widow before the Natasha Romanoff.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's Russian.
That's a different Black Widow.
Yeah, totally.
That Black Widow is the timely Black Widow who came back in the 12 and who is a witch who made a deal with Satan to send bad men to hell.
Yeah. It rocks. I wish there were more of it.
That was great. That's a great reference because the original timely Black Widow was awesome. Just like the original timely version of the Destroyer was much better than the Thor robot, but that's a whole nother thing too. Because the timely Destroyer is basically an American who's stuck behind the lines in Germany and joins the German underground, as a superhero.
I think one of the things that gets that people kind of forget about is the very first appearance of Ant-Man, and it's a deep anti-communist.
Yes, and that's the same book as Iron Man.
Tales to Astonish.
Written by which Iron Man was the lead and Ant-Man was the backup. And then later on, Iron Man moved over to Tales of Suspense and became the lead there, and Ant-Man became the lead in Tales to Astonish.
Yeah.
And soon Tales to Astonish stopped being sold because Ant-Man is a shitty character who could never front a comic book. I'm sorry, he never could. Every attempt failed. The only good thing ever done with Ant-Man was done in the pages of Iron Man.
The movies are painful as well. Like
you know what's really bad about the movies? What's really bad about the movies is the fact that Henry Pym created Ultron. But that's a whole nother topic.
But it's funny what you say about Iron Man, because like Iron Man is in a way, isn't Iron Man kind of like an obnoxious pro-capitalist version of Captain America?
Iron Man, actually, the best way to look at it is that Iron Man is the techno-industrial capitalist hero. If you want to look at if you're looking for an Ayn Randian figure in Marvel Comics, it's Tony Stark. Now, Tony Stark's politics are a tiny little better than Ayn Rand's. It's got a very positive spin.
Elon Musk fashions himself literally as like an Iron Man, except I mean, if you
let's start it. Let's start with the fact that Tony Stark invents his own shit.
If you take the Iron Man that's in the the Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man, he's still he still does fight for good.
Well, so this is where
Elon Musk is a full-on
Iron Man went through a change in the 80s. Iron Man went through his own change in the 80s, which is worth its own show because Armor Wars is a brilliant capitalist finds out the government can't be trusted story. But
is that Michelini?
Michelini was the writer, but the editor of Armor Wars was, of course, Mark Grunwald, who wrote Captain America during the same period, and who started to put a little more maturity into the Iron Man stories. One of the first Michelini stories is still a communist bad guy, but Mark Grunwald's influence as an editor is really seen when Iron Man attacks the government prison because he finds out the jail guards are using his suits. Mm-hmm. Well, first he had given the government a suit that he had built for his old security head, just as you can use this, and instead of just keeping that one suit and letting that one government employee use it as a government agent, they made 500 of those suits and put them on the prison guards in their prison for superheroes.
Which I think is the logical, inevitable outcome of Iron Man as a character.
Yes.
You can't bottle that up, and there's simply no escaping it as a writer.
And Grunwald is like, you know what? You've got to come to terms with this and really deal with it. And so that was and you get the great Armor Wars story where he goes to war with the capitalist who secretly stole his shit and sold it to the government. Mm-hmm. And he ends up destroying all the other versions of his suit out there, even ones that belong to friends.
But now, but then Captain America, again, it's very interesting, reading about the background, and the very left politics of the creator. Do you think that's why, given all you've said, at the beginning of this conversation, that's why it took so long for I'm sure there has been animated series about Captain America. But
there have not, sadly. There was a Marvel superhero series, which was both wonderfully nostalgic and the worst production values ever, because it isn't even a real cartoon. It's some really cheap animation here and there and a lot of stills from comic books. Mm-hmm. Now, I loved it as a kid because it was like watching a comic book on TV. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't deeply popular. There was a Spider-Man show that was done the same way that was much more popular and lasted much longer.
I told you I gave up trying to watch X-Men the animated series after
there was a Spider-Man show by the same. There was a Spider-Man show by the same shop at the same time that was also really good. Mm-hmm. And they even had a crossover with the animated X-Men series where the Beast came on Spider-Man, and they fought mutants together. Bad mutants, of course.
We can't forget that Thor TV show too that had the really shitty animation and just the mouths that were superimposed.
Yes, that's part of that Marvel. That's part of that Marvel superheroes. They had Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, and Captain America.
Yeah,
and the last run of the Captain America before it ended was him being found by the Avengers and meeting Rick Jones and all that stuff. They were just coming into the modern world when all the non-Spider-Man stuff got canceled.
I think this is why I was very into anime.
There was also
Dragon Ball Z.
There's also a really bad '90s movie starring a soap opera actor and Ned Beatty and Ronald Cox, and has the Red Skull as an Italian fascist instead of a Nazi.
Instead of American, really bad. German.
When the Red Skull isn't German, you've made a mistake. But despite all its badness, it had its good. I watched it anyway because I was a Captain America fan, and I tried to like it because I was a Captain America fan. looking back, it's really bad. And it set comic book movies back for decades. It was one of the reasons that in the Nick Fury movie starring David Hasselhoff that was direct to video in the US and only released to theaters in Germany and Austria. That these things put people off of comic book movies for a while.
There's also the
awful
Supergirl movie,
or the Quest for Peace.
Yeah. Not Superman's finest moment. I'm a huge defender of Superman 3, but
I love Superman 3, but Richard Pryor is the good guy in Superman 3. Fight me.
I mean, he does just steal from a corporation. That rocks.
No. He doesn't just steal from a corporation. He steals the money the corporation is stealing from its employees. It's about wage theft.
Yeah.
He steals the money the corporation is stealing from all its employees. He steals those half cents.
And he skis off the roof of a building and survives.
Yes. This is great. Richard Pryor is the hero. I don't care.
It's a shame though. Like I think like when Richard Pryor did Superman 3, which was widely panned. Although I'll watch it one of these days. But I think that's when he realized how much like he actually like hated like the film industry.
Richard Pryor was an exception to the rule of the time that black comics were only successful if they really didn't have much to say. Richard Pryor was tremendously successful despite having something to say. And a lot of the reason that he's been negatively stereotyped by black capitalists and white film aficionados is because of his really very left-wing and pro-black politics. I mean, we're talking about a black bisexual man who was reasonably open about it in the 1970s and trying to work in the movie business.
Whoa. I didn't know that. Richard Pryor was bisexual.
I had no idea.
You guys didn't know that?
Nope.
He wasn't even in the closet. It's a constant joke on his TV show. It was one of the reasons he was taken off the air.
Oh wow!
The last episode of Richard Pryor is a roast by everybody else on the show, roasting him, and it is full of references to his various jokes on the show about his experiences as an underage queer man having sex with grown-up queer men in the way that was done in those days that we're not supposed to talk about now.
Huh.
Well, that explains why he's on record saying that he actually did not appreciate like Eddie Murphy's very explicit, not aged well at all queerphobia.
Well, and that really he didn't like that at all. No, he was someone who was bisexual. His show, again, the reason the Richard Pryor show was taken off the air is it had lots of what we would call child abuse jokes now that were about his experiences as a young black queer man who wasn't legal yet.
Wow,
dude! Why doesn't Chris have like his own like radio like TV show like?
Well, man, so for one thing, these are things. I mean, these aren't exactly things people want you to know in the first place. I mean, that's why people have been censored this way. I mean, the fact that his show had just been taken off the air is the reason that Cleavon Little is in Blazing Saddles instead of Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor co-wrote Blazing Saddles with Mel Brooks and wrote it with the intention of himself playing Bart, but was told that he couldn't play the role because his show being canceled was such a big news that the movie studio didn't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole.
Mm.
But again,
they cast Cleavon Little.
But again, that goes to show you how even the supposedly like best documentaries you get exposed to, how much censorship goes into that. Because I can tell you, 100% of Richard Pryor's fans, if you were to say that to them, they would all be like shocked. And I've
I
seen
don't
like
think all of them.
I've seen Richard Pryor documentaries
If
where
you
they talk about like his very eccentric, like like upbringing, but they completely omits.
You know the recurring joke. You know the recurring joke in comedy in general, with its slightly homophobic tinge, where the guy says, "And that's when I found out there was no candy in the van." That's Richard Pryor. That started with Richard Pryor. That's when I found out there was no candy in the van is Richard Pryor.
Wow. I cannot wait to tell my friend Bernice.
Richard Pryor's stand-up in the 1970s was really, really, really queer. It's done in the and it's in the context of the things that almost every queer person growing up went through at his time, but in a specifically racialized setting where on top of being in the closet, they're also racialized. And this is one of the reasons he was so controversial. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of his stuff that was commercially successful is toned down from the stuff that got him thrown off TV in the 70s.
Wow.
But even then, his stand-up was always pushing the edge. His stand-up was never not political.
But it's so weird. But you see, that's so weird in of itself, because when we're like anytime Richard Pryor is talked about, whether it's documentary and so forth, where it's told, ooh, he really pushed the edge with like racial politics and talking about like race relations, and Richard, his like crazy cocaine use and stuff like that. Like that's what we were taught about like Richard Pryor, and of course, and if you look at his body of work. Live at the Sunset Strip, the one where he makes fun of about like his freebasing incident. Are you saying that like a lot of the stuff about his bisexuality, child abuse is all completely edited out?
Well, it's basically replaced the later stuff, the 80s stuff, the big Richard Pryor stuff in the 80s. Is still very good, is still very clearly expresses his racial politics, but and his racial politics were themselves very controversial. But he dropped a lot of the queer humor that got him thrown off TV was gone in the 80s. He never did the openly homophobic stuff that Eddie Murphy did, but the queer stuff that got him thrown off TV was gone. You won't see stuff like you'll see in his roast in any of the successful post Richard Pryor show movies. Mind you, there are some great movies. The best Mark Twain adaptation ever is Brewster's Millions.
Fascinating. It's amazing how much like so much of like our heroes and so.
But then, so the 80s, Mark Grunwald. What's most important about the 80s and Reagan is while Reagan was president, Captain America refused to work for the U.S. government.
This is the pedigree of Civil War, which is a pedigree of Mark Miller making that decision for Civil War.
Yes, and the bad part about Civil War is that the post-Armor Wars Tony Stark should never have made the decisions he made in Civil War. He should have been on Captain America's side the whole time. That was a bad decision. It should have been Reed Richards on the government twerp side. Which he was. He was working with Tony Stark, but still, Reed Richards is the one who would have sold everybody else out to the government.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a bad man.
Well, I don't know about bad man, but Reed Richards is a capitalist, even more so than Tony Stark. Reed Richards is the capitalist who lets his employees fund his superheroing business while they work. The Baxter building is owned by Reed Richards. He's the landlord. Everybody else is paying him rent. That's why this Fantastic Four can afford to live on the top floor.
Speaking of funding superheroes,
but worse.
Yeah,
it's his underage wife's money. So this is why This is why the one racial recast that I will always complain about is the recasting of Susan and Jonathan Storm in the Fantastic Four reboot as black actors. Because white privilege is so fucking fundamental to who Susan Storm and Johnny Storm are. Johnny Storm is a spoiled, hot-headed, white teenage superhero who would have been shot by the cops if he were black.
Mm-hmm.
And making that character black is like a total denial of the racial reality of America. Because he's such a selfish and anti-authoritarian and anarchistic character that if he were not a white teenage male, the cops would kill him.
This is why,
And Susan Storm is this stereotype rich heiress who fantasizes about her father's best friend, which is to say, Reed Richards groomed her.
Jesus Christ.
So you have to understand that Reed Richards is a wealthy capitalist because of the money of the young girl he groomed.
That's up
so
there.
Maybe he's a bad man. You were right. This is why he's Dr. Doom's ancestor.
Yeah,
Kang's ancestor.
So. That's up there with Ant-Man. Having his wife get killed by Hungarian fascists.
And, see now to be
fair. Wait, but and then when he comes back home to America and he's trying to find some way to fight crime or whatever, and then the Wasp shows up, or the eventual Wasp, and it's this girl who's like 14 years old.
Yes,
and she looks just like his wife, who was killed by Hungarian fascists. She was killed by communists.
No, unfortunate reference. But Jack Kirby was a man who did not get married until his early 30s, and his wife was 18.
Mm.
So
14.
Hey, but again,
it's
important to understand that Jack Kirby's wife admired him from a young age. And
so
now we're getting into this grooming thing again, and it's hard to get away from this when talking about historical personages. However,
yeah, it's a good point.
There's lots of there still is like ongoing controversies about like Charlie Chaplin, who all of his like girlfriends, without exception, were all grotesquely much younger than him.
Well, and there's a whole lot of there's also and Jack Johnson's girlfriends were much younger than him too, but that wasn't why it was controversial.
But his last wife, Ona O'Neill, who's the wife of Eugene O'Neill, a Nobel Prize-winning playwright, he like disowned her for marrying Charlie Chaplin, but they had a very happy marriage, and they had several children. One who kind of
So this is the thing, and I have a problem with grooming.
Yeah, but taking a hard line there.
I can only trash. I have to be careful how much I trash age differences, because my wife's older than me, so I would look hypocritical. Now, I will also say that one of the reasons I hate grooming is that, the reason I'm attracted to older women is that I was groomed, and that's a whole other thing. But my wife didn't do it, and that's not. And our age difference issues are not her fault. So that's a whole nother thing. But all that aside. So yeah, Captain America in the 1980s refused to work for the U.S. government, was fired, and was replaced by the U.S. government by a blonde-haired ex-Marine with a crew cut who did whatever they wanted and just got a little bit angry and occasionally beat people to death.
Will I say it again?
And he had a worse costume. He had a worse costume too.
Well, his Captain America costume was the same Captain America costume.
I thought you were talking about U.S.
Super Patriot costume was horrible.
Oh, you're talking about Super Patriot.
Captain America while he was Captain America, he wore the regular Captain America costume and eventually became U.S. agent and disgraced the great Anarchy black costume that Captain America wore in the 80s. That great anarchist black where he was refusing to work with the U.S. government and just calling himself the Captain, no America to it. And there was another Captain America who was disgracing his name.
But all of that really great, like, politics and, like, kind of, like, underhanded, subtle protest against, like, Reaganism and so forth.
CIAism. I mean, a lot of it started in the 70s with the church hearings, and it's this protest against CIA patriotism in Vietnam, really.
Interesting. But you can only find that in the comic books.
That's in the comic books. You will not find those Captain America stories in the movies. Though, I will say, the Winter Soldier.
I was going to say the closest you would get would be Winter Soldier.
The Winter Soldier and the first Avengers movie, both...
Which was good. The first Avengers movie
was
portray
the essential character of Captain America as the guy, when America does shitty things, is the one who stands up and says, fuck you, and joins the people America is being shitty to. During that same 80s, another Mark Grunwald story has him going to a fictionalized Central American country that is essentially El Salvador and helping the rebels overthrow the dictator.
Good.
Doña Maria Esperanza. And they had a romance thing going here. So for a while in the 80s, Captain America's girlfriend was a Marxist guerrilla.
Hell yeah.
Meanwhile, Rambo is helping Afghanistan free themselves from the tyrannical communists, and that later becomes the Taliban who harbor.
That is not what the first movie was about.
No,
that is what the first movie was about, let alone the book. But
that is true. The first Rambo movie, which I haven't seen, is really just like a cop like being like an asshole to him.
Have you ever read the book?
Completely out of control.
Have you ever read the book?
No, I haven't.
You need to read First Blood. I understand. I get that. I hear that from people all the time. But everybody can read First Blood.
It's very annoying.
Well, First Blood is about veterans.
Yeah.
Rambo is a Vietnam vet, and the thing that really makes me ashamed of the movie when I watch it, as good a movie as it is compared to the later sequels.
Oh, except God, the last one. Awful.
But as good as it is compared to the later sequels, the end of the book is very different than the end of the movie. And the way that Sheriff Teasel is portrayed is very different in the book than in the movie.
Wait, 1 second. Spoiler alerts, if you're interested in seeing Rambo, you might want to mute for a couple of minutes.
Yes, spoiler alerts. We're going to talk about how First Blood ends.
And Chris will make a sign that says you can now unmute. So
well, here's the mute sign. And so now, that said, and since you're not going to read the book anyway, probably, I guess it doesn't matter.
I may just watch the movie, though.
In the book, Teasel is a Korean War veteran. He was a member of he was a ranger during Korea, and his experience was not as much different from Rambo's as it is in the movie. And as Rambo sinks back more and more into I'm in Vietnam in his head, Teasel is sinking into I'm in Korea in his head. And it's all about them both getting lost in their trauma and killing each other. And at the end, Rambo kills Teasel, and the character Richard Crenna plays in the movie, Troutman, kills Rambo. And this is important because David Morrell's fiction is all about how people who work for the government can't trust the government. And it is Troutman, the man who made Rambo into a killing machine in the first place, who kills him at the end of the book.
Interesting. So the book is a subtle protest against government, just like
all of the David Morrell books are Reagan era paranoid thrillers, which is to say that the U.S. government is in some way connected to the bad guys. In the case of First Blood, Rambo, the bad guy, this is lost in the movie where Rambo is the hero, but in the book, Rambo, the bad guy, is a Vietnam War veteran who is a tragic villain who might have been a good guy, but he is just too far gone. The government has made him a killer, and he can't not kill people anymore. And Teasel, who believes he has rehabilitated himself back into normal life, goes back to being a killer confronted by Rambo. And they both lose themselves in their wartime experiences while they're fighting each other, who are both Americans.
But then there's a scene in, I believe it's the first Rambo movie, where he basically like goes on a huge passionate rant about how I fought for my country,
yes,
and all of you guys completely threw me under the bus.
Now, and
the Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, because there were also a lot of traumatized veterans from that war that don't often get the attention they deserve. Whereas Vietnam, a lot of soldiers felt that they were like shortchanged by the government and by the anti-war.
This is basically, and Teasel, as a Korean War vet, is as traumatized by his experience as Rambo. And sinks into his experience the same way Rambo sinks into his experience.
And Teasel's the cop.
Teasel's the cop. Teasel's the sheriff hunting Rambo. Teasel is the tragic hero of First Blood in the same way that Rambo is the tragic villain. Rambo is somebody who could have been a good person but was ruined by the government. And Teasel is somebody who thinks he is a good person who reverts to being a killer when confronted by someone like himself. And Teasel is just too old to be able to take Rambo in a fair fight and gets killed. And Troutman, who doesn't fight fair, kills Rambo.
Interesting.
And it's really about the way that the Vietnam War veterans maybe got lots of public and cultural sympathy, but were discarded by the government as inconvenient because the government lost that war.
Interesting shit. Very interesting.
And of course, it's also a metaphor about Korea, because Rambo is allowed to be traumatized by Vietnam and wander the country, whereas Teasel was forced back into a semblance of normal and was not allowed to be mentally ill.
It's important to note too that the veterans of the Vietnam War weren't just discarded because they were expensive to take care of, even though they were more expensive to take care of. The actual problems that they had represented an ongoing reminder of the failures of Vietnam.
Well,
they would result in developmental problems for further generations.
Well, let's also talk about what David Morrell is saying in First Blood. He's also saying that these veterans, who could have been good people, were broken by their experience. And many of them, in fact, became criminals because of their abandonment by the authorities.
Interesting.
Which is sort of the whole point of Rambo. I mean, Rambo commits a crime because he goes back into his head in this guy's going to kill me mode. And so he immediately defends himself in the most extreme way possible and kills the person who took a swing at him.
But what did the movie do that was completely like?
Well, the end of the movie, so nobody stops, nobody unmute yet. The movie ends with Richard Crenna, with Rambo killing Teasel, and Richard Crenna recruiting Rambo to work for the government again. Rambo has a safe trip back to the warm and comforting bosom of CIA, which is all he's fit for now.
And then Rambo Last Blood is just about how every single person in Mexico is a drug dealer without electricity.
There's so many movies about
I think that's basically like 99% of like all like movies that are like set in like Mexico.
Yeah.
Like
it's like
the land of sepia tones.
It's like the number of politically good movies about Mexico can be boiled down to like 4 or 5. There's Touch of Evil, which I mentioned before, which is a politically good movie about the border. There is The Magnificent Seven, which is a politically good movie about farmers fighting bandits and standing up for themselves and winning their own fight.
Great movie.
And the professional fighters recognizing at the end that soldiers always lose.
Yeah. I was shocked, even though the Magnificent Seven has the Mexican characters as white people in brown face, I was shocked the humanity that it ascribes to them. I did not expect that at all. I mean, obviously there's problematic, it's problematic that they are white actors, but if you were to divorce that from the script itself is actually very respectful.
Well, that's the whole thing. The main 2 Mexican characters, the guys who go to the border town to find Yul Brynner in the first place. You want to look at the movie in a certain frame. Those guys are the heroes. They're the ones who say, let's go buy guns. And then when the old man says we need to fight, they say, let's go buy guns. And they go to the US to buy guns. And they end up meeting Yul Brynner instead. And he says, instead of hiring guns, why don't you hire men with guns? Because then, you're hiring people who know what they're doing.
Well, interesting that Rambo from what I'm hearing, at least like like the films. I mean, certainly like the Rambo, like all the Rambo movies that came after Rambo 1, basically like it justifies the Vietnam War. It justifies supporting reactionary Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Yeah. And then you have the other big action hero of the time, who is a Republican, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Terminator. Like the only conclusion you can come watching any of the Terminator movies is be careful of the military-industrial complex and do not let something like artificial intelligence get in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's kind of funny is that the Terminator is a very cyberpunk sort of story that very much befitting the time in which it was created, with its paranoia about the future and technology. But it's fundamentally kind of reactionary.
You find Terminator is reactionary. The messaging in Terminator reactionary.
Ultimately, because in the end, if you take all the Terminator movies in Hollywood up to their point, in the end, the final message is, oh, you can't actually stop this. It's going to happen anyway. Mm-hmm. You might as well not have bothered.
Yeah, it's sort of a like the technocratic, like wet dream.
Yeah,
like it is
very dystopian and pro-capitalist in the end.
It is absolutely like the warm blanket for Silicon Valley.
Well, this is where I would disagree with you. I wouldn't say like the message is reactionary in the end. I just think I the message in the end is that it's very depressing because it's like there is like no stopping this.
Well, so when I say it's reactionary,
ergo do not trust AI in the hands of the government, and in fact, don't even fuck with it.
Cyberpunk is why I believe in the new criticism and believe that T.S. Eliot and all the other people who said auctorial intent doesn't mean shit and you have to do a close reading of the text were actually right. Because cyberpunk is something where William Gibson, when he first wrote Burning Chrome and published those first cyberpunk stories, was thinking to himself, oh my God, I got to warn people that this is what they're heading for. And now we have a world run by people who were kids when those books, when that book came out and thought those stories were cool.
The torment nexus, basically.
And you've got people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who are like bad guys from a William Gibson story. I mean, Jeff Bezos literally looks like Lex Luthor, if we want to go with the good politics of comics.
And Elon Musk does look like a much uglier version of Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, as Tony Stark.
And even that's giving him a lot of credit.
I think of Elon Musk as Elon Musk more as Maxwell Lord than Tony Stark. If you follow me, Nat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, but just without the although you wouldn't know it from his Twitter following, without the mental powers of Maxwell Lord.
Well, Maxwell Lord didn't originally have those. Originally, Maxwell Lord was a well-meaning rich guy who just also had this really awful power complex.
I just I bring up the powers because I'm currently rereading Infinite Crisis.
I personally see Donald Trump as like a real life Joker, and Nigel Farage
he
as
was
like real life Riddler meets Riddler meets Joker kind of
Donald Trump in real life. Back to Captain America.
Yes.
Donald Trump in real life is George Maxson, the rich guy who's pretending to be a German spy under the Red Skull mask in the first Captain America story.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I haven't actually read that one.
That's the very first Captain America story. The Red Skull is killed in that same story. That's the story in the famous cover with Captain America punching Hitler in the face in 1941.
Yeah, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon.
And yeah, the story is the first Red Skull story. The first Red Skull is millionaire industrialist George Maxson, who is an undercover spy for the Nazis in an echo because he wants to be fascist dictator of America in an echo of the business plot.
Careful, you might give Marvel an idea to actually make Donald Trump into a Russian agent, and then that's going to feed into like
Russiagate,
NATO's endless wars against Russia.
So in the bad politics of Captain America, you have the 1950s and the Korean War, where there was a brief revival of Captain America and the World War II, and there was a reboot with in which World War II heroes were united, who had all had their own comics, but didn't appear together very much, except for the really famous Submariner and Human Torch crossover, which was the first crossover in comic books, and they were already doing it in 1941. It was amazing. But that aside, that one thing aside, you didn't have a lot of continuity in comics in those days, and most of those superheroes didn't actually team up. But in the 1950s, they teamed them up as the invaders in both retroactive World War II stories, which were, of course, the worst sort of America won the war kind of stories. Yeah, everything starts on World War II started on D-Day.
Yeah.
And Korean War stories in which they were going to Korea to fight the Chinese for MacArthur. And this was also the period where you have the McCarthyistic and awful little run where Captain America is beating up black criminals who really work for the Communist Party. And this is the bad politics of Captain America.
Wow.
And this is just trying to latch on to the big thing of the time, which was anti-communism, Joseph McCarthy. There weren't necessarily deep politics behind it. They figured this will be commercial because communists are bad in the public consciousness.
Also a little subtle, like.
But it's racism. They're saying, but it really, because the communists were black guys, it really feeds into the civil rights movement as communist.
Which a lot of it was.
Some of it was. Some of it was not as communist as we would have liked.
No, of course.
But yeah, no, a lot of the people in the civil rights movement, especially early on, were really believed that they were fighting the bourgeois democratic revolution being talked about in Black Bolshevik, and that was necessary in order for there to be a working class revolution in actual racial harmony.
Right, a proletarianized class that could then be.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, all this talk about comic books, this is why I had to bring this. The Batman Forever, like McDonald's glass. And
yeah.
Like the Happy Meal. Still drinking this to this day.
Now, the bad politics of Batman Forever is that the secret government agent actually cloned Batman so that there would be a Batman all the time, and it's just a CIA op.
Dick.
Per the wrap up of Batman Forever as portrayed on the Justice League TV show. Where it was Amanda Waller cloned Terry from Bruce Wayne's DNA.
That's right. That is the end of the Justice League show, isn't it?
In that last season of Justice League, that was their wrap up for Batman Beyond, which had just been canceled.
Yeah.
And so they did that episode where you find out that Batman Beyond exists because Amanda Waller secretly cloned Bruce Wayne.
Wow, I'd forgotten that.
Batman the Animated Series, I have to say,
was great.
Fuck all of the live action. Batman Animated Series got Batman right. It's a shame though that I think like they moved it to like another TV station, and then like the animation like quality went down.
It went to the WB from Fox because the WB had the Superman animated series. And at the time that
notoriously, everyone hated working on that show.
Well, what's funny is that for the first season, everybody loved that show. For the last season, everybody hated that show. And the second season in the middle is a lot of hit and miss.
Are you talking about Superman?
Superman, the animated series.
I meant that most people just wanted, the people that were like working on that show simply wanted to be working on the Batman show.
Oh, I've heard that too.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Not that they loathed.
Also, that first season of Superman. That first season of Superman, the animated series, is the best Superman storytelling since John Byrne in the 80s. It was better than what they were doing in the comic books at the same time.
I really enjoy that one. You know what I think is the best modern representation, or mostly modern representation of Superman, is the very first season of Supergirl. Before it went to the CW, back when it was on USA, it is exactly what I want out of a Superman story. It's bright, it's hopeful, it's fun, it's dramatic. There's moments of like soap opera goofiness that I'm totally on board with. I love that she asked to hide her secret identity.
I will admit that my take on the Supergirl, the Arrowverse Supergirl on the whole. This is
pre-Arrowverse. This is.
But no, I know that. But it was still created by the guy, co-created by the Arrowverse people and by Ali.
But I'm just saying the vibe changed.
I know the vibe was different. The vibe was different
when it moved to the CW.
Even when it was different, it was still very similar vibe. Even when it was different, and even before it was Arrowverse, it was still Arrowverse. It just wasn't openly Arrowverse.
I would say it certainly is. It has more parallels to the vibe of the.
But my favorite fact ever is finding out that that Jeff Johns, who made a joke. And it was taken seriously. And despite Jeff Johns being a joke, his joke ended up being good storytelling. Somebody was saying, we really need to do an Arrowverse show about the Martian Manhunter if it lasts long enough. And they said, well, why don't we just have and Jeff Johns said as a joke, why don't we just have Hank Henshaw really be John Jones?
Yeah. Which Hank Henshaw, that name by itself is also a deep cut.
Yes. And they had Cyborg Superman as a bad guy in the second season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they did the Hank Henshaw stuff fairly well, I thought. But in general, Supergirl as a whole is the best Superman storytelling ever.
I love the season. I love season one. But
Supergirl actually works better than Superman as a Superman story. And my view of the Supergirl TV show in its flawed totality is that the best Superman story ever told is the fourth. Sorry, I have to do this in my head for a moment. Fourth season.
Oh, by the way, people can unmute now.
Yes, everybody can unmute now. Everybody can unmute now. In the fourth season of Supergirl.
When you publish this, just put in like in the show notes, unmute at this part.
Where while I was actually watching the fourth season of Supergirl, I tweeted, when it comes to the Sons of Liberty, Manchester Black is right.
Mm.
And I immediately got a like from David Ajala.
Oh, no way.
Yes. It's one of the few times I got a like from a celebrity. But I said, when it comes to the Sons of Liberty, Manchester Black is right, which was a statement about Nazism and MAGA and a bunch of other things.
Yeah. You know, the
because
best one
I thought that was the best Superman storytelling ever, because it shows some of the weaknesses and limitations of Superman as an anti-fascist character. And it really showed, and Manchester Black, while he comes back and really does go bad at the end, Manchester Black was right about the Sons of Liberty, and Jean and Kara should have listened to him before he went off the deep end. Sure, he was already a little off the deep end, beating people to death with baseball bats, but they're Nazis.
The whomst among us.
I mean, this is the whole thing.
I finished watching the last season of The Boys, and I thought it was the most depressing, like nihilistic.
So you have to understand. You have to understand that Garth Ennis, the man who created The Boys, probably thinks he's sort of a leftist, but is one of the most reactionary people in comics.
100%.
His Hitman story.
That last season, personally, I was hoping that this season of The Boys would be the last season. Now I'm praying that is the last season.
The Boys,
because season
The Boys is a nihilistic comic book about that makes Watchmen look happy by comparison.
Yeah.
The comic book is really dark, really nihilistic, really reactionary in the sense that no power can ever be good. Power is always bad.
Yeah.
And it's just deeply, deeply, deeply. And they lose and the TV show lost the thing in the comic book that made it most redemptive, where the subversive part of the comic book in The Boys is the fact that the entire history of superheroes in America is built on a lie. The actual first American superheroes were all killed by the Nazi superhero shortly after D-Day. And that the American superhero project is only possible because the Nazi superhero and the scientist who gave him his powers defected to the U.S. to get away from the communists after World War II. Mm-hmm. And Homelander is actually a clone of the Nazi superhero.
Hence why he's a MAGA piece of shit.
Yeah, but so in the comic book, they do in the TV series, they do the Nazi storyline different, and the Nazi hero is an actress.
Yeah.
And the Nazi stuff is totally different. And it's not as fundamental to the origins. The World War II heroes were still sort of heroic, and they didn't all get killed. It was not the same. America can't do eugenics right. They had to steal it from the Nazis.
Even though it was the American and British eugenics movement that actually
started. Yeah.
Well, but that's the whole thing. Yeah. Is that Hitler did America better than the Americans. I mean, that was what the business plot guys thought anyway. Hitler's doing America better than we are.
Well, parts of Mein Kampf are directly lifted, literally plagiarized from Henry Ford's pamphlet.
Yep. And this is why Captain America punching Hitler on the face as a patriotic hero is deeply subversive in 1941, because a lot of capitalists still, he's going to invade the USSR any day now. We should not be making nice with the British. And so when Captain America was punching Hitler in the face, shortly before he actually did double cross the Russians and declare war on the U.S. after Pearl Harbor, it was a big deal. It prefigured a whole lot of stuff. It was not a profoundly obvious thing like it would have been in 1943.
Mm-hmm.
It was a risk, and it was a risk that paid off because of history. And, Captain America was kind of a Nazi figure in the 1950s. He was pulled off the shelves really fast because it wasn't successful the way they thought it was. Kids, even in the 1950s, were apparently not racists who wanted to see their superhero beat up black guys.
Yeah.
That didn't sell. And it was pulled off the shelves. And when Captain America came back, the bad guys weren't communists. The bad guys in Captain America were always Nazis. And I have to say, the thing that I like about the Nick Fury Shield comic books too is that Nick Fury, a Cold War spy, is not taking on communists. He's taking on Hydra, who are unreconstructed Nazis.
Mm-hmm. I wish the same could be said for the Avengers book that Captain America was in, because they definitely fought communists.
Well, and that's the trouble. And that's the trouble, is you had a lot of weird stuff going on in the Avengers, and some you had communists join the bad guys. And you had some definitely fighting communists during the bad period in the 70s. You had some definitely not so great stuff in the 1990s, when the War on Terror, where Captain America is working for S.H.I.E.L.D. again and fighting terrorists. Now, in his defense, the terrorists are still AIM and Hydra and white supremacists in Yugoslavia, and he doesn't ever actually fight Arab terrorists. Marvel was not willing to go that far.
Until about 2003.
Well,
when the terrorists invade a small town in Kansas.
Yeah, well, that's, yeah.
And they literally attack this small town in Kansas on Easter Sunday, and they take everybody hostage, and they wire them up to a bunch of bombs in the one church in town, because apparently, it's Christianity that they hate, and not the fact that we've been bombing their countries for 40 years.
Yeah, see, 2003.
Yeah, that was
Toy Biz. That was the Toy Biz era.
I can't remember who wrote that one. That's Captain America: The New Deal. It was John.
It doesn't matter who wrote it. It's Avi Arad.
Yeah.
Avi Arad, the Zionist.
Yeah, major Zionist.
Who overpopulate like the entertainment industry. It's really bad, like having like rabid like Zionists.
Well, I mean, again, Jack Kirby was someone who was struggling deeply in his mind with the contradictions of Zionism. There are clearly good people who work for Magneto, even though Magneto himself is bad. In Jack Kirby's whole vision is that Magneto is a bad man, secretly manipulating his good kids into doing bad things for their father, and he won't even admit that he's their father. He's making them do bad things for a stranger.
Interesting.
And this is sort of a whole metaphor. This is sort of a whole metaphor for Zionism. People are making you do bad things, and it's not even real. You don't even know the truth about what's going on.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting.
And, that gets lost in some of the later X-Men stuff, which is clearly Chris Claremont, despite also himself being a non-practicing Jew with some left-wing political associations. Chris Claremont really doubled down on the mutants are black people thing, as opposed to the mutants are Jewish people thing.
He sure does in one very specific panel.
Yes. Well, in a lot of very specific.
Interesting stuff.
But at the same time, people have been ripping off either Jack Kirby or Chris Claremont for years and years and years ever since, because they're scared to tell their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Grunwald was the last guy who told his own stories, and some of them were corny, but they all showed deep thought and actually trying to wrestle with real issues. One of the corniest bad guys is Brother Nature. And Brother Nature is this long-haired eco-terrorist in the Pacific Northwest who has the power to do things like control animals and control weather. And, Captain America doesn't even so much fight him as convince him to not hurt innocent people, but still go after corporations and such.
Mm-hmm,
I think I'm going to introduce you to my friend and his X-Men sort of thing.
Yeah.
kind of like Poison Ivy. She's like,
but it's like he doesn't
terrorist.
defeat the bad guy. He ends up saving him after the bad guy breaks his ankle, and the bad guy's not that bad. And the resolution of the story is, yeah, I think you should meet my bald friend.
Yeah.
Batman has a lot of characters like that, where it's like bad guys who are actually quite tragic in a way, like Two-Face, like being like obvious. But even Riddler, like you kind of have like a little bit of like empathy for him because it's like his own boss is like fucked.
So it's like, well, the guy who,
and he's got OCD probably.
The most interesting character. The most interesting character in Batman, who people keep trying to do stuff with because he's so interesting, is Harvey Dent, a.k.a. Two-Face.
Yeah.
I still wish that Billy D. Williams had played Harvey Dent again in Batman Returns, and we could have seen Billy D. Williams as Two-Face instead of Tommy Lee Jones. That would have been interesting.
By the way, that was so weird how, like, in Batman Returns, like Billy D. Williams is there for like literally like 5 seconds as like Harvey Dent, and then like at some point he just disappears from like the movie.
Billy D. Williams isn't even in Batman Returns. Harvey Dent is retroactively Tommy Lee Jones in flashback scenes. Billy D. Williams
talking about Batman Forever?
In Batman Returns. He's in the first Batman movie.
No. Batman Forever is Tommy Lee Jones. Billy Williams, he plays Harvey Dent, and you see him for like 5 seconds.
Yeah, tiny moment of Batman Returns. That's right.
That's what I was saying. Like, it's so weird that like it's so weird that they shoved that character.
He was originally. I mean, the reason he was originally in the first movie is because Billy D. Williams really wanted to play Two-Face and thought he had a 2-picture deal.
Oh, is that what? That would have been interesting.
It's like, actually you know how many of these people who are in superhero movies as bad guys are just in them because they're comic book nerds?
No. Harvey, wait. No, I don't think Harvey Dent is the mayor in Batman Returns.
He's not.
No. I mean, in the first one, in
he's
Batman,
the district attorney in the first movie. He's just.
I thought for some reason they had made him the mayor in that universe.
He did become.
I could be wrong.
He didn't become mayor. He's the DA in the first movie. He's Billy D. Williams. He's black.
Wait. 1 second again. Billy D. Williams is in like the first Batman movie. The one
it's Harvey Dent.
Jack Nicholson and Kim Basinger.
Yeah, he's Harvey Dent.
Yeah.
Wow, I completely don't remember that. I can't believe
he's not like a huge part of the movie.
He's probably the most important character.
Okay, wow, weird.
He's important because there was originally a scene in the movie, as in the comic book, where the police were chasing Batman, and they think they chase him into Harvey Dent's office, and they talk to Harvey Dent, and Batman's not there, and Batman's really hiding under Harvey's desk. Because in the comic book, Batman was originally being hunted by the cops, but worked with the DA sometimes. And so there's a scene in the Frank Miller comic book, Year One, which is one of the few good things Frank Miller did. There's this just great scene where Batman is hiding under Harvey Dent's desk while Harvey Dent talks to Lieutenant Gordon, who's looking for Batman. There was supposed to be scene was supposed to be in the movie with Commissioner Gordon talking to Billy D. Williams while Batman was hiding under his desk.
But again, this is why, like, I didn't like Tim Burton's adaptations. Batman Forever is like, The ones that Christopher Nolan did are good, but I still have like my
What's
issues.
depressing about
this is why I would say to any like Batman fan that doesn't want to get into the comic books, do watch the animated series and if you are game Batman Beyond, because I think they did like fairly well.
Good. And Justice League. Watch the Justice League cartoon if you like Batman.
Yeah, I don't even care that they shipped in with Wonder Woman. It's still
I like that.
Cartoon.
I mean, the Batman Wonder Woman relationship works.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's really fun. That's exactly the sort of person Wonder Woman is interested in. Her boyfriend is not Superman. Her boyfriend is Steve Trevor, the ordinary non-super
one of the most boring characters in all of comic books.
The most boring character in all of comic books is Wonder Woman's boyfriend. Yes,
And let me
What a
just say,
pull.
and let me just say, and this is what really pissed me off about Batman Returns. Now, Michelle Pfeiffer, beautiful actress, talented actress. But the way they made like Catwoman into this like broken, like whiny,
so
that's
where
Batman the animated series did a
they
lot
did
of
it.
justice to
They
Catwoman.
couldn't do it the way that Catwoman had been rebooted in the comics. See, originally in the 1940s, Catwoman is a rich girl who's playing at being a jewel thief.
Okay.
And has a crush on Batman.
Yeah.
And isn't super interesting or special other than that. She's a rich girl playing at being a jewel thief who has a crush on Batman. And she was that way for years. And Catwoman became a popular character, as did the Joker and the Penguin and the Riddler, because of the Batman TV series starring Adam West, where she was played first by the brilliant Julie Newmar, and second by the absolutely insane Eartha Kitt. And they were two of the most iconic portrayals of any comic book character on television ever.
So that's why they had to have Halle Berry play Catwoman. They thought if Eartha Kitt could play,
well, and so yes, it was Eartha Kitt. Halle Berry's like Eartha Kitt. The trouble with that movie was that it wasn't Catwoman; it was somebody completely different, and it had nothing to do with Catwoman or Batman. And it was
considered one of the worst movies of all time, along with Batman and Robin, and Halle Berry gracefully showed up at the Razzies to accept her awards.
Yeah,
fun fact: an actress named Sean Young had her career ruined when she went on Oprah saying Michelle Pfeiffer was miscast. She should have been given the chance to play Catwoman, and then showed everybody her Catwoman costume, which was really, really good. But everybody said she was crazy. She was hard to work with. This was a meltdown. And she basically got blacklisted after that.
Who was this?
Sean Young. Her last role after that was the horribly transphobic bad guy in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Oh, yeah. That's where I know that name. Einhorn, Finkel. Ugh, what a horrible, horrible joke.
Yeah. And I think Jim Carrey's even on record of saying that he actually
everybody's sorry. Everybody's apologized for that now, and people seem to have forgiven them in a way that nobody would ever forgive the guy who made Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith.
Well, that's okay. That's a subject. Okay, I have a great idea for another show, but that is a subject that is definitely worth exploring. Why is it that we are so forgiving to the queer phobes, particularly the trans phobes these days? Whereas if somebody was to say the kind of stuff they say about trans people the way they would about my people, black people, indigenous people, Jewish people, if we lived during the golden age of anti-Semitism,
Richard,
that is a subject that is definitely worth exploring.
Richard Pryor took queer jokes out of his routine because he was run off TV when he told them.
Oh, bring it all back around.
Yeah. Hello, boys.
We're going to have to stop soon.
Yeah, I was just about to say, anything else we want to talk about just before we get.
This is actually where I want to say that I want to go back to the Ultimates, which is the worst Captain America politics ever.
It's atrocious.
Where Captain America is not a man of his time, as Mark Miller tries to portray, but is rather this reactionary figure from the 1950s that has nothing to do with 1941 Brooklyn.
Right.
And it's again, Mark Miller thinks Captain America is Archie Bunker from over there in Queens, which is a different culture.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows anybody in New York City, ask somebody about the cultural differences between Brooklyn and Queens before gentrification.
Yeah. I mean, he literally beats up children for taking his things. Yeah.
Yeah, Captain America would never have done that in the actual 1941 Captain America comic book, because again, to go back to the roots, in 1941, Captain America is a polio survivor from the only place in the country where the leading registered political party is the Communist Party of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
It's all there.
And this is why the first Captain America movie, I know people say World War II is overdone, but this is why the first Captain America movie spoke to me, because there is a scene where Stanley Tucci says, you make a strong man stronger, then he's still a strong man. He's just stronger. But a weak man, given power, understands what it's like to be on the other side. And and people do not understand that Captain America is a disabled hero. He is a polio survivor who is given superpowers, but still thinks of himself as that kid with polio. And now he can do all the things that kid with polio couldn't for all the other people who can't do them.
Mm-hmm.
He lives and breathes solidarity despite being dressed in the American flag, which is very popular front.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Now, you can talk about all the weaknesses of the Popular Front, but in the end, Captain America shows the very best of Popular Front communism in 1941.
Hell yeah.
And you see, both in the 70s and the 80s, where the very best of Captain America grapples with these deeply anarchist and communist ideas and says, maybe we should stop listening to our government so much. And Captain America quits, and the government takes the costume away and puts it on a blonde-haired Marine with a crew cut, who, again, occasionally accidentally beats people to death. Which, if that isn't a metaphor for police violence, I don't know what is.
If that's not a metaphor for like how America conducts itself.
Yeah.
And this is also important because, he's supposed to be here being a superhero to make people have faith in America, and he's losing his temper and going nuts and accidentally beating people to death.
Here's hoping, if climate change doesn't come sooner and accidental nuclear war, that somebody takes those original comic books and makes a damn good,
so
TV series out of it.
Winter Soldier is fundamentally, when it comes down to it, a movie about Captain America finding out that the CIA is Nazis.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's the only one that the Defense Department at least threatened to take their underwriting away from.
Yeah, because remember Project Paperclip, Project Gladio. I can't remember the name of the one where they resettled people in New York and Canada and Argentina.
Yeah,
I know the Nazi name for it, but the U.S. didn't call it Odessa when they helped. But anyway, all that stuff, that is what Winter Soldier is about. Mm-hmm. And Captain America is right in the middle of it. And he's like, fuck you, I'm not going to take this. And that's really like the iconic Captain America movie. I'm glad they made Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. I'm glad that whatever else happens and whatever mistakes they made, I'm glad the MCU existed, because they made Winter Soldier, mm-hmm. which is the true Captain America movie that always should have been made. Captain America finds out the CIA are the Nazis. And he does something about it.
Yeah, and does something. That's the kicker there.
And when once this show is uploaded, I'm gonna also just saving some links that I think the audience will appreciate on some of the stuff that we talked about.
Of course. And now, you guys, what do you guys want to close out with before we wrap up?
Just thanks for enlightening me about the very interesting politics of like Captain America, and I'm well. I think one of these days, I actually, I have two twin nephews, so I'll try to find them some of those like comic books for them to enjoy.
I don't know. Captain America is not as easy to find as X-Men.
Only the first one.
Captain America is not as easy to find as X-Men, and a lot of the stories that can be found are not always the best.
Because the best ones are just kept by people.
Yeah.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
There's the really good Liberty's Torch, which is the one where Jack, which is a graphic novel by Jack Kirby's understudy, Mark Evanier, which is a reaction against how he thought Marvel was doing Captain America wrong during the War on Terror, and sort of tries to bring Captain America back to like his anti-establishment sort of communist-y roots.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of a blip at that point, and you don't really start seeing that anti-establishment Captain America again until Chris Evans gets pissed about using the cosmic cube to make weapons of mass destruction in Avengers. And that's just such a great moment in Avengers. That's like the best moment in Avengers, where Captain America wants to punch the shit out of Nick Fury because he finds out what he's been up to.
Yeah.
See, I can keep going, so you'll have to actually have kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, I already said my closing thoughts, so it's off to Nat now.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for having me. This was great. I really enjoyed my time here. There's a lot of meat to think about for this whole Captain America thing. Obviously, like with every single comic book character, because there is such a flood of content for them. There are highs and lows. And
I look at DC Comics now, and I don't even recognize what DC Comics was.
Oh, totally.
Despite the fact that in some ways it's closer to what it was than it ever was before.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really very weird. And then at other times, I look at Marvel and it's the same way. It's like they just keep telling these awful big event stories over and over again that are just rehashes.
Mm-hmm.
What's disappointing?
That's Disney in a nutshell, by the way.
Yeah.
Like
it's disappointing about Civil War. This is a good place to stop. This is a good place to end, because Civil War was the worst of the original 3 Captain America movies. The thing about Civil War that failed to work was ultimately the fact that it was just Magneto and Professor X all over again with Captain America and Iron Man. This time, Captain America is Magneto wanting to lead the other superheroes in the defense of their rights, but and Iron Man is Professor X, wants the superheroes to cooperate with the government, and this is the worst part of it.
Tony Stark's a douchebag.
It is done in a way. It is done in a way that reduces it to a moral question for each reader to make for themselves about who is right, instead of casting Captain America as the guy defending community and solidarity and liberty and equality. And Iron Man, who does villainous things in Civil War, is supposed to be portrayed as equally justified and equally good as Captain America, despite obviously being a villain.
Right. Yeah.
Spot on.
Atrocious movie.
But that's the fundamental comic book as well.
Sure.
It's just Professor X and Magneto with this moral gray area, the best things taken away from Professor X in favor of the worst things. The worst things taken away from Magneto and replaced with the best things.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're saying, this guy's supporting tyranny and this guy's a freedom fighter, but it's morally the same, and you have to decide who you agree with.
Right. Yes.
Exactly. Well, folks.
And that's the worst of the Captain America politics of all, even though Iron Man is the one who's speaking for them in that Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both for having me on. I appreciate you. This is really fun.
And I'll just say, keep calm and carry on, and free Palestine, love Palestine, and
free Palestine.
And Collective Action Comics Podcast, 1+1, and the Eclectic Radical. Please support us.
Check us out. Thanks, y'all.
I'll see everybody next week, and we'll tweet at you.
Bye.